Chapter 4. Something happened to me the night I met Zach. Honestly, I never touched profiteroles again. I just went right off them, which is really saying something because they're literally my favorite food after the vanilla cupcakes at Magnolia Bakery. I fell for Zach the minute I laid eyes on him. Something inside me went ping, and there I was, suddenly smack dab in the middle of my own coup de F-O-U-D-R-E, French. Just like the brother and sister falling for each other in the Royal Tenenbaums. I'm still not quite sure if it was Zach or the Jude Law in him, but he was beyond romantic. I mean, get this. After we first met, he rang me every day and asked me to have dinner alone with him each night. I said no exactly every other night because when a man looks like Jude Law and can have anyone he wants, it's very important not to be too available. And it's a huge stress getting ready for dinner with Jude Law, so I needed a whole 48 hours between each date for my lovelorn nerves, which were in total shreds, to recover. Then, of course, there were other things about Zach that made me melt, like the fact that going to Brazil with him was better than any of the other very few men I've gone with. I mean, he could find Rio absolutely every time, whereas most men only get as far as the suburbs before they want to go home. He seemed to adore everything about me, even the bad stuff. Like he thought it was charming when I offered to cook him dinner one night and ended up ordering in. Being a New York girl at heart, the only thing I can cook properly is a twice-toasted bagel. He rewarded me by doing insanely romantic things, like one time he sent me a bunch of peonies, my favorite flower, every day for 5 days in a row, with a note attached each time. The first note read 4, on the second was written my, the next was 1. After that came 2 more notes saying and the other saying only. For my one and only, it was too cute for words. I didn't eat a thing the whole week. Zach was a spectacularly talented gift giver. He always found things that I really wanted but didn't even know about until he gave them to me. On my birthday, he surprised me with a beautiful black and white print of one of his photographs from the Drowned series he'd done a few years back. Parentheses, the photo is of a burned-out truck half submerged in a lake. I know it sounds like a weird birthday gift, but I was overwhelmed. Close parentheses. Here's the pic of the other gifts. Leather-bound first edition of my personal Bible. Gentlemen prefer blondes. Galouchette, French insurance, I guess. Jewel case from Asprey. That's a dead stingray, by the way. Baby pink monogram stationery for Mrs. John L. Strong that takes a week to order unless you're someone like Zach and can turn them into doing it in a day. Fringed antique Peruvian shell from the flea market in Lima. Zach loved to take me for dinner at out-of-the-way dreamy little restaurants. Of all of them, JoJo on East 64th Street was my favorite. It's right off Madison Avenue with a little pane window that you can glimpse twinkling candle chandeliers through. You sit on the slouchy velvet banquet at the little black lacquer tables. The walls are painted a faded old blue and antique screens separate the tables upstairs. Honestly, you can go there and feel like you are the only pair of sweethearts in the world. The night we went there, on an indulgent date celebrating our 2-month anniversary, I think Zach wrapped his ankles around mine all night, as though he never wanted to let go. We just giggled and laughed and kissed all through dinner at stupid things like how awesome the French fries were. Parentheses, the secret is that they cook them in truffle oil or something crazy like that. The only thing that slightly freaked me out in the first few months was Adriana A. A few times when I was over at Zach's loft in Chinatown, the phone rang and Zach didn't pick up. Adriana's voice came on the answering machine asking Zach for lunch or dinner or drinks to discuss work. Anyway, it turned out I was worrying about nothing. After a while, she stopped calling. The only person who wasn't delighted by my romance was Mom. It wasn't that I shared all the details of my Manhattan love life with her, but she'd read about it in a gossip column and called to check whether or not it was true. Darling, I heard little Earl might be coming home for Christmas. It was late December. And I do think you two are meant for each other. I took a deep breath. Mom, I'm sure little Earl would loathe me on sight, and I have no intention of spending my life in a drafty castle looking at sheep. Anyway, I'm sure you and Dad would like Zach. Who are his parents, darling? I have no idea. He comes from Ohio. He's a successful photographer. It was true that I actually knew very little about Zach, apart from the fact that he was very handsome, lived in Chinatown in a huge loft, and never went to bed without drinking an espresso first. He took his career very seriously and sometimes would disappear for days without warning. He could be very mysterious and elusive when he wanted, which of course I adored. Julie always says she can pack a bag for a weekend in St. Bart's in a heartbeat. This is an outright lie. She actually takes about a week to pack for a trip, but the point I'm trying to make is that when you're as madly in love as I was, everything seems to happen in a heartbeat. After what seemed like 15 seconds, but in real time must have been 6 months, around the middle of March, Zach asked me to marry him. Can you imagine? We've been having such fun, it felt like no time at all had passed. The only trouble was that the proposal meant that moi and not Julie would be the one with the PH, which was somewhat of a conflict of interest. But even if I was secretly freaked that Julie was going to be beyond mad at me about it, I couldn't say no. I was madly, madly in love. Zach was the perfect PH in every way. Despite the fact that sometimes his work binges meant that he vanished into a black hole for a whole week and didn't return my calls, he'd always emerge with a fabulous dinner invitation and throw me all over again. Julie was surprisingly relaxed when I told her I was engaged. She approved of Zach, recognizing that he was way too arty for her. She didn't seem to mind as much as you'd think that I'd snag my PH first, saying, "Your wedding will be my dress rehearsal. I learned from your mistakes." You can imagine Mom's reaction when I told her I was marrying Zach. First, she threatened to die of a headache, and then she insisted on throwing the wedding at Swire Castle, which you can hire for functions. Even if it wasn't exactly my first choice of venue, I was so happy I decided to let Mom do whatever she wanted. She had the church, flowers, hors d'oeuvres, cake scheduling, and even a particular type of confetti, freeze-dried rose petals from Convent Garden Market, mapped out in immaculate detail within hours of hearing my news. I guess Mom had been planning my wedding since the day I turned 16 and had decided to put a brave face on the fact that I was marrying an American photographer rather than a British earl. After the engagement, I felt like the most popular kid in high school or something. Everyone in New York was as addicted to Zach as I was. We were invited everywhere together, and everyone wanted to know about the wedding plans. Even the girls at my office were in love with Zach. They're all smitten with Jude Law, too. And my skin had never looked better. You can imagine how delighted I was when my editor asked if I wanted to go out to LA for a few days to interview a famous actress. She sweetly insisted I take the gorgeous fiancé and booked us into a 4-room penthouse suite at the Chateau Marmont, the famous one with the grand piano. People are so nice to you when you're engaged, it's crazy. A whole 4 days with Zach sounded like bliss. In fact, it would be the longest time we'd spent together since we'd met. I couldn't wait. When my friend Daphne Klingerman, who is an actress turned professional wife of a brilliant agent turned producer turned studio head, heard I was coming to LA, she emailed me from her BlackBerry saying, "Can't talk, I'm in yoga class. Can I throw you a party in Beverly Hills?" I can't imagine what yoga position you can send an email from, but Daphne has been practicing Ashtanga yoga every day since her last role. So I guess she's an expert because her last role was more than 2 years ago. Spring is the best time to be in LA, and I totally worship the Chateau Marmont just like everyone else in Hollywood. It always makes me think of Rapunzel's castle, perched like that just above Sunset Boulevard with its little turrets peeking serenely above the craziness on the ground. By the time we arrived that night, it was very late. Even so, the lobby was buzzing with the usual super cool Hollywood kids that favor the chateau. I wasn't tempted by the scene. All I wanted to do was get Zach upstairs and take him on a very, very risque trip somewhere south of the equator. Our suite was totally sick in a good way. The sitting room was huge and had 2 long modern sofas at one end, the grand piano at the other, a huge Art Deco mirror, and a slick 1950s Italian coffee table in the center of the room. On top of it was an ice bucket containing a bottle of vintage champagne. The bedroom had nothing but a very inviting bed, 2 silver lamps, miles of stereo equipment, and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows which opened onto a terrace. While Zach tipped the bellboy, I stepped out into the evening air and looked into the Los Angeles night. The view was electric with its millions of lights stretching from Hollywood to the valley. Even though I was exhausted, the suite was so sexy I thought Zach would have no problem going to Brazil all over it, maybe even exploring as far as the Amazonian jungle immediately. Zach, do you want to hit the rainforest? I called coyly from the balcony. He was unpacking the bedroom. I'm busy. Hey, come on, I giggled. Stop being so boring. Stop being so needy, he replied without turning around from the closet. Darling, Sting and Trudy visit the rainforest all the time, and no one thinks they're needy, I said. Zach didn't say a thing. He didn't get the joke at all. He always giggled with me about my silly jokes, but tonight he was different. He said he just wanted me to leave him alone so he could check his emails on the internet, which is a real waste of a 4-room suite at the chateau, if you ask me. By 1 a.m., Zach still showed no sign of getting into bed. He was frantically typing at his keyboard in the sitting room with a hostile look on his face. It was like he hadn't even noticed the view or anything. And as far as I know, men just don't turn down sex with women, period. When I finally mentioned this to Zach, he turned away from his laptop and looked very annoyed. Can you please let me get on with my work for 1 second? He huffed. I suddenly felt shamefully guilty for demanding his attention all night when he was so busy. I'm sorry, what are you working on? New ad campaign. It's a lot of money and the pressure's really on. That's great, I said. Which campaign? Luca. They want a whole new approach. Is Adriana A in it? Yeah, she's a drag. Can I get on now? Zach went back to his computer and I went into the bedroom and slumped on the bed. I felt disappointed. I lay there and stared out through the windows. Suddenly, the view seemed bleak as hell. It was depressing. I felt like I'd woken up and found myself slap bang in the middle of a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I was beyond embarrassed when I called Daphne 2 nights later. How could I tell her that Zach had barely said a word to me since we'd arrived? I know he was under a lot of pressure, but as far as going to Brazil and all that was concerned, well, I hadn't left the Arctic Circle once since we checked into the chateau. I mean, I'm not saying Luca L isn't a big deal, but Zach was acting as though he was about to paint the Sistine Chapel. Honestly, he barely let me near him. Whenever I even mentioned sex, he'd just say, "Stop harassing me," or something really mean like that. It reminded me of a couple times in the past few weeks when I'd suggested sex and he'd complained he was too tired or had a backache or something incredibly tiresome like that. I'd believed him, but maybe he secretly hadn't wanted to make love. The truth was we hadn't gone anywhere near Rio for over 2 weeks. Still, I'd never seen him like this before. He wouldn't do a thing. When I suggested a drive up South Topanga Canyon to my favorite thrift store, Hidden Treasures, parentheses, you have to check it out. I swear you just have to, parentheses. He refused and went back to working on his ideas for the Luca campaign, which is exactly how he'd spent the last 48 hours. Where had you log on? This was like being engaged to a different person. The only thing that had stopped me from freaking out was knowing that I had to keep myself together to interview the actress, which I'd done yesterday. Daphne, I wailed when she picked up. Get out, she said. Daphne starts every sentence with get out. What is it? It's Zach. He's in this horrible mood. All he'll do is watch CNN and send emails. He's barely spoken to me since we got here. All because he's shooting the new Luca campaign with Adriana A. Maybe we should cancel? Get out. You can't cancel. Bradley's flown in the Cirque on the studio's plane to do the food. Look, about them not talking to you, don't worry. Bradley hardly ever talks to me. Men are so sexy when they're brooding and laconic, said Daphne. You gotta come tonight. There's gonna be a lot of people who want to know you, and you're gonna want to know them. Zach eventually agreed to go to the party, but only after Daphne called him personally and told him there were going to be a lot of Hollywood mogul types there with serious photography collections. Strictly on the QT, I think Daphne exaggerated a little. She has exactly one friend who collects photography, but then Daphne exaggerates everything, especially her age, which she claims is 29, but is closer to 39. As I got ready that night, I tried to be positive. I mean, one of the brilliant things about a virtually silent fiancé is that you have hours to get dressed. So I wore a terribly complicated Azadine Alea hook and eye number that takes forever to do up. Even my misgivings about Zach's sudden personality change couldn't stop me from being thrilled by the Alea. There are killer dresses, and there are killer dresses by Alea, which are so killer, they're homicidal. At the last minute, Zach threw on a white shirt, jeans, and a beaten-up leather jacket, which completely ruined my appetite in advance. He looked so delicious that I knew the Cirque Symphony of desserts wouldn't tempt me at all. Daphne lives in Beverly Hills in a sprawling Spanish-style house set in grounds that sprawl almost as far as the Hotel Bel Air. The driveway was lit with flares, and as usual, Daphne had gone way overboard with the flowers. There were huge vases filled with jasmine flowers and branches absolutely everywhere you looked, even in the restrooms. She'd gone completely over the top with the staff, too. Daphne likes to have about 15 butlers per guest, which makes for a very crowded party. When we arrived, the drawing room was so full that guests were already spilling out onto the terrace towards the pool. The whole garden was lit with lanterns Daphne had picked up on one of her shopping trips to Morocco, and loungy tapestried rugs and cushions were spread out on the lawn. I'd barely had a chance to take in the scene before Zach veered off in the direction of Daphne's collector friends, leaving me standing alone in the center of the party. Daphne suddenly grabbed my arm and introduced me to a young actress, Bethina Edmonds, who just won a Golden Globe. Bethina was an immaculate size 0. You know how actresses are. Tiny, petite, perfect. She had long, gleaming, honey-colored hair and was dressed in a yellow satin slip dress and strappy silver sandals. She was totally channeling Kate Hudson, which is what everyone is doing in LA right now. She was wearing a sparkly engagement ring the size of Manhattan. "Oh, I'm engaged too," I said. "Where's your ring?" said Bethina, examining my left hand. "My fiancé hasn't got it yet." It was true. Zach kept saying he was going to get me a ring, but somehow he never got around to it. I don't mean to sound superficial, but it was bugging the hell out of me. I mean, an engagement with no ring is like Elvis without the rhinestones, or a Bellini without the peach juice. I didn't care what kind of ring it was, but I wanted one. Zach had it easy with me and made no specific demands regarding the ring, whereas Jolene had told her husband to be before he proposed that anything less than a D-flawless 5-carat diamond would be unacceptable. "Ew!" shrieked Bethina. "There is no way I would have agreed to marry Tommy if he hadn't given me a ring bigger than California when he asked me. I'd feel terrible if someone got me a huge ring." This isn't quite true. Actually, secretly I wanted a ring that was bigger than the planet, but that isn't the kind of thing you should admit, so I never do.